Saying Wisdom, and I'm Janine Thompson, and we are going through a series that I have dubbed the Treasure Template or the Treasure Path, and it is discovering our own stories and looking at our histories in different ways to bring out the lessons that life teaches us. So let me ask you this question. When was the last time that you looked at a story and asked yourself, what actually grew from that experience that I had? Is there something that I learned from that I actually use in my life? And we're going to explore the letter R. It's the first R in the word treasure, and it stands for recognize growth. And today I have 4 stories that I'm going to share with you. 3 of these stories are from historically documented sources, and then the 4th one is going to be my own personal story, which I bring out because, hey, if you can't tell your own story, then you're living vicariously through other people's lessons, and that is good. But we need to learn from our own as well. So I'm taking this journey with you, and I invite you along, and I hope that you'll get a notebook and jot down the things that come to you. Last week we talked about taking notice, and becoming aware is one of the first steps. If we are aware that there's something in our lives that bears looking at, if there's a memory that's there that stands out among all the others, there's usually a reason or a lesson to be learned. And so it's a fun journey sometimes to just take a quick look at it. And sometimes we want to go deeper and look at those things. Today we're going to explore what grew from our hard places, our hard experiences. Now, the first story that I'm going to illustrate this with is the story of Harriet Tubman. I'm sorry. And she is a woman that grew up in the slave era, and she was born a slave, and she had a very difficult life. And her life, actually, one of the most tragic things that I found about her life was that she had no childhood. Oh my goodness, it makes me so grateful for my childhood and for the things that I had. And so gratitude for that lesson alone was worth looking at her story. But her story is quite remarkable in the fact that she had several experiences in her harsh conditions of growing up where she was treated very badly. And she, at one time during her teenage years, she was injured severely. She had a blow to the head that caused her for the rest of her life to have seizures. And those seizures, when she would have them, she would have what she called visions. And she believed that it was God speaking straight to her, and that it opened some kind of way for her to hear him. But she would have these terrible episodes. And in those experiences, she became very unshakable in her faith with God, incredibly unshakable faith. But she was able, finally, at one point in her life, to escape her captors, and she was able to get away herself. But it wasn't enough for her to just by herself be free. And so she actually put herself in a hard situation where she actually went back to where she could easily be captured, but she was the means of 70 other people escaping. And she went back 13 times to help these people, get away, and a lot of them were her own family members. But she was able to do that amazing thing. And in the process of her getting away, she had to survive in the wild for quite a while. And she became quite an herbalist, and she became very familiar with the plants and how to use them for healing. And so that too was a remarkable history, that she was able to, I believe, save many lives during that time. The next story I wanted to tell you is a very incredible story. When I first saw a painting, it was called The Two Fridas. And to look at it, it wasn't, to me, most impressive painting in the world, but I wondered because it was the same person, one in light and one in kind of shadow. And it made me look at her, this woman that painted them, and her story is what captivated me, because she was only 18 years old. She was on her way to become, she was on her way to medical school, actually, and she was in Mexico, where she lived, and she was in a terrible accident that left her severely injured, and she spent months in a hospital bed. And she had nothing at all to occupy herself. And so her mother created an easel, made it a special easel that would fit over her. And her father hung a mirror at the end of the bed. And the only thing that she had for reference to paint was herself looking at the mirror. And so she became the study, or the study of all these paintings that she created during her convalescence. And for all the time that she stood there, it was a survival tactic for her to get through her terrible pain and rehabilitation. And so she also went on to be quite the speaker for people with pain issues and dealing with the emotional and the trauma of terrible pain. And so I thought that was an amazing story. She did not set out to be an artist, and she became quite famous for her art, which was a completely different direction than her life had planned to go. And so out of her illness and her injury came a totally new direction in her life. And the third story that I want to share is the story of Mary Oliver. Now, she's an American poet, and I find that sometimes I gravitate towards different poets because I like poetry. I love to write it and I love to read it, but I especially like simplified poetry, if you can say it that way. And I liked her style of writing because it seemed very down to earth and very simplistic, at least a lot of the ones that I've read of hers. One of my favorite is probably one of her most famous ones. It's called The Summer's Day, and it talks just about discovering, looking at life in a perspective that is quite unusual. And she describes this grasshopper, and it's made me look at even grasshoppers a little bit differently. But when I got looking at her life story, it too came from a background of real hardship. She grew up in a home that was, she described herself as very cruel and abusive. And she didn't belabor these issues, but she did recognize that that was the reason that she escaped into nature. And she said in an interview that I listened to with her on YouTube that it was during her later years, not long before she died. But she said that nature healed her, and poetry healed her. And that's how she learned to survive. But she would run into the woods and she would stay there for extended lengths of time. And she built huts out of sticks and grass, and she used to hide pencils in the trees so that she would never be caught without one. And she began to write at the age of 14 her poems. And she said that it would just, some of them would just be almost like they were dictated to her, and others she would struggle with. And it was through watching nature and listening to the lessons that it taught her that she became the poet that she became in her later years. She was, I think it was 50 years maybe that she wrote poetry. But she was born in 1935 and she just died in 2019, I believe. But she had a long life and she had a lot of insights, and she helped millions of people through her poetry and her writing and her interviews. But I believe that her spirit was awakened through, and she even expressed that in her interview, which I would encourage you to look for. I'm trying to remember the exact, if I can find it, I'll put it in the links again, but I think it was on a podcast or something called On Being. Anyway, she had a hard life, and her interview was, I thought, very well worth listening to. But what grew from her hard experiences was a love of nature, a love of words, and a beautiful way to express them in a way that helped many, many people. And so she served a purpose. And then we're going to come to my own personal story. And of course, I'll probably have a little bit more detail to share because it's my story and I know the details. So my particular story that I'm going to share as pertaining to the R, it is included in my book, and I don't know how many of you have read it, but there's a few out there who have. Maybe my few YouTube followers have read it, but this is it. It's called The Comeback Chronicles, The Beautiful Mess of a Resilient Life. And this is a book of reflections where I have outlined kind of the beginnings of these stories and how to look at them, because I've made it a practice in the last few years to go back and look at my stories, the things that made me who I am, the experiences that have made me who I am. And this one is included in that, and I'm going to give you a different version maybe than what's in the book, or at least a different twist. And that is my story that starts with a typewriter. Actually, it started with the need for a job. And I was working at the time in a very low-paying position, hard work, very long hours, and I wasn't making ends meet, and I was leaving my children a lot for just surviving, and I recognized that I needed something that was going to pay a little better. And so I went searching for a job that would suit my needs better. And I went in and applied for it, and I passed everything except for the typings test. I failed their skills test on typing. And it wasn't even a hard test necessarily, but my speed was too slow. And so I got a typewriter at a yard sale, and I began to practice typing. And I didn't know the keys. I got my mother to show me where you put your hands on the keyboard and which fingers you should use for what keys, and I tried to memorize that, But mostly I just had to practice, which any skill is done through practice, of course. And so I took this typewriter, and the way that I learned to type was to close my eye, put my hands on the keyboard, close my eyes, and I would type my prayers. And I'm sure that if God was going strictly by the written word and not what was coming from my heart, he would have needed a decoder because those papers were pretty illegible. I couldn't even read them when I opened my eyes, which was fine. I didn't want anybody else seeing what my prayers were and if I happened to have them laying around. But over time, those papers became more and more legible, and I could type a little bit faster. And so I finally did go back in and reapply for the position that I had applied for, and I got the job, barely passing the typing test. But then here, later on, several years down the road, my little 2-year-old was at the babysitter's, and I was constantly farming my kids out. I didn't like it, and I wanted to be home with them, but I didn't have any support other than my own work for us to survive on, and so I didn't see any other way. And so I would farm them out to different babysitters. And anyway, one day she was at the babysitter here at 2 years old and got away from their yard. And oh, you can't imagine the terror that goes through you as a mother to get word that your daughter is missing and have no idea where they are. And the frantic prayers and the search. And for one thing, at the time, I didn't even get told until hours after the fact, and I was just at work thinking everything was just fine. But when I finally got that call, and then later, the relief that came when I found out that she was found and that she was okay. But the trauma that I went through and the trauma that she experienced at that young age was something that I wouldn't wish on anybody. But it opened the door to something that it was no longer an option for me to keep doing what I was doing. No, the options that I had were, you got to find a way to be home with them. If you have to work, you work, but you have to be home. And so that became my next mountain to climb. And I found out that there was this thing called transcription work where you could use your typing skills and you could type up different documents for different companies and deliver them. And so what I needed was a printer and a computer, and this was in the very early days of computers when not everybody had computers in their homes, and I certainly didn't have one. So became a quest of getting these items, and then of course learning the skills that it would take to do it. And I found a woman who did transcription work, and she agreed that she didn't have time to necessarily tutor me, but that if I wanted to do it, it would be a good test for me to take some of the transcription tapes. Back then, everything was dictated on a tape, and you just would listen to it, and then you would transcribe it and then you would print it out and take it to the doctor's office and leave it, come back. So it was travel time, and it was also the work between and the printing. And anyway, I would take some of her old work, so things that she'd already transcribed and that she'd already delivered, and I had to, without providing any patient information or anything that would violate laws, I would listen to these tapes and just transcribe these very difficult at the time, were so hard to understand, because it was like typing a foreign language and I did not understand. I had no background in it at all. And so I had to learn medical terminology. And it was done strictly through doing it. And the use of stacks of medical dictionaries that were by my desk. And I would just do this labor-intensive work just to learn the skill. And finally, she saw that I was serious enough that she actually said, you know, she would take me on and I would take the tapes first and type them up or transcribe them all out on the computer and then give them to her without printing them. And she would re-listen to the tape, make any corrections that she would find, and then she would deliver those. And so I was the first set of ears on those tapes. And as a result of that, she actually started to pay me a little bit for doing the initial the initial outline of work. And I'm sure it was a lot of cleanup work for her in the beginning. And then over time, she gave me more and more to do, and it became my career. And I eventually took over doing some of her, she introduced me to some of her doctors, and I took on doing the job solo. And that was my introduction to medical transcription. It was a self-taught skill, and I went on to do it as a career for over 30 years. And so that all came from these hard times where I needed to make a change in my life, and I had to acquire a skill to do it. And so what grew from all that? The hard things that became the very livelihood that fed our family for so many years. And later, many years later, AI took over and I was replaced by a computer. We no longer use those kind of skills, and unfortunately, I will say, I'm still in the medical industry and I still work with medical records, and I hate to see what's become of that industry. Let's just put it that way. But I actually had quite an identity crisis when the computer replaced my job, because I had learned to identify with the job instead of with myself. And that's a story for a whole nother lesson. So for the letter R, recognizing what grew there. We don't usually get a certificate of achievement by surviving, but we do go through periods where survival is all it feels like. It does not present itself as a lovely little potted plant and says, growth is here. This is progress. No, it just looks like a pile of dirt. But things do grow in it. Our situations, they create roots and they grow something. And if we look at it right and we recognize there's so much to be grateful for those hard times, even the hardest times. When I look back, it's some of the hardest times where I can be the most grateful for the lessons that it taught me, because I can see where, hey, I had some beliefs formed there, And it made me question this, and it made me analyze that. And I can see so much more clear in this area than I ever would have even thought. And maybe I wouldn't have even been willing to have an opinion if I hadn't been forced to look at a situation. So those are different things. But let me ask you something. If you'll just think about it, has there been a time in your life where it felt barren, but you can recognize now that there was something growing there? Now, a lot of times our lessons are learned backwards. We really don't see them until years later, and it's through looking back that we're able to look forward with new eyes. It's the answers that come through the hard times, when we're really looking for answers and we're asking the right questions. Those are the times when the real treasure is found, and those treasures are worth mining. They're absolutely worth the mine. And I want to also, because I mentioned AI, it's a big thing in the world today, but AI can't tell your story. Only you can tell your story. AI can't learn from your story. Only you can put the insight into it. And so these are things that are really important to me. And I hope that I can instill the importance of these things to you. So if you're willing, and I hope that you will be on this journey with me for a long time, especially as I'm learning through a new skill again in my life. I hope you'll stick with me through my YouTube learning journey. And hey, if I can learn to type, and if I can learn medical transcription, I can learn to understand the language of the medical world, then I think I can learn the YouTube language as well. It's just going to take me some time and patience. And I hope that you'll be along with me for a good long time on that journey. So a few things that I'm going to leave with you to think about this week. So what questions can you ask about hard seasons in your life? If you were to go back and look at them, what grew there? Not what did I survive, but what grew there? Think about that. And then ask yourself this question. Was there a skill that I learned that I didn't have before that I actually use? There's a question. And then I want to ask you this question. Did somebody else recognize your growth before you did? And if so, then who was it? Those are things to not just think about, but I dare you. No, I'm not going to dare you. I'm just going to invite you to write it down. Don't just think about it. Take the pen, take the pencil, and write it down. Make it a record, even if it's just a short note. And please share it with me. I'd love to hear it. And I do read those comments, and they mean an awful lot to me, and they're going to help me learn. So where do you go from here? Well, first of all, I hope that you'll stick with me, and next week we're going to take the letter E, which is for extracting the jewel. We all have a jewel in our stories, and we're going to extract those in a couple of stories next week, and I think that you'll enjoy that. And I look forward to seeing you then. But until then, I hope that you'll find someone to share this video with. I hope you'll comment on it. And please hit the like button and give me your support that way. And I'd love to have you subscribe to my channel and follow me along. Be part of my YouTube community. I'm looking forward to getting to know you, and I can only know you by what you share with me. So please do that. Like and subscribe. And then, of course, until next week, when we look at that letter E, I hope that you'll tell your stories Share your wisdom and leave a little light behind you. Just saying.